This New Orleans Saints Carolina Panthers opening game comes entirely down to the adjustments that the coaches make throughout. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and the Saints analyst at WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to dive into the outside zone run game and how it is set to help revitalize Alvin Kamara in 2024. We'll take a look at how that run game on both sides of the football can be the difference in this weekend's New Orleans Saints and Carolina Panthers matchup. But we're going to lead everything off here with why it's the head coaching matchup that's going to be the most important in this weekend's game. It's going to be a game of adjustments. Dennis Allen, Dave Canales, who has the edge? We're going to break that all down on today's episode of Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and is brought to you today by our friends over at PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to get $50 instantly when you play $5. We appreciate you very much for being here, as always. And for me, this game could very well be looked at as a game that is about Derek Carr and the New Orleans Saints' new offense, or about Bryce Young and his development within the Carolina Panthers offense with new head coach Dave Canales. But I honestly think that the two most important matchups going into this game, because no one knows what to expect from these two teams right now, is Dennis Allen and his defense versus Dave Canales and his offense, and then Evero Ejiro, the defensive coordinator for the Carolina Panthers, up against Clint Kubiak, the new offensive coordinator for the New Orleans Saints. Those, to me, are the two biggest matchups in this game. Forget about just looking at what the players are going to do. This is all about how the game is called, how these two teams work in the chess match of adjustments against one another. Here's the truth going into this matchup, and one of the reasons why I think it's one of the most honest matchups that you'll see in week one. Everyone knows what to expect from Dennis Allen's defense because he has the same personnel. But no one knows what to expect from Ejiro's defense over in Carolina because he's coming over from Denver with a brand new defense. No one knows what to expect from Clint Kubiak because, sure, he's called plays before back in 2021 and 2022 with the Minnesota Vikings and eventually the Denver Broncos late in that season, respectively. But no one knows what his new offensive system looks like fully with this scheme, with Derek Carr running it, with these players, and with a year of working with Kyle Shanahan over in San Francisco. And while the New Orleans Saints are familiar with Dave Canales' offense when he was with Tampa, they're not familiar with Dave Canales' offense with the Carolina Panthers, nor are they familiar with Bryce Young anymore. Yeah, they played against him twice, but it doesn't matter. He's in an entirely new system with an entirely new coach and an entirely new sort of life of football at this point ahead of him. No one knows what to expect from this matchup, and therefore it's going to come down to the coach's willingness and ability to adjust on the fly and make things happen. Who do I have the most confidence in to do that? Well, it's Dennis Allen over on the defensive side, without a doubt, because we've seen Dennis Allen do this over and over and over again, right? The New Orleans Saints defense is the most and will be the most consistent unit on the field on Sunday in this game versus their own offense, versus Carolina's defense, and versus Carolina's offense. The New Orleans Saints defense is the most consistent and trustworthy unit that will take the field on Sunday in this game. So I trust Dennis Allen and the New Orleans Saints defense to make the adjustments necessary to be able to curb Bryce Young and Dave Canales. But of course, it's going to come down to the execution on the field as well, and in particular, making plays at the quarterback. A lot of people look at Bryce Young as a quarterback who's not a mobile quarterback because he's not scampering for 50-plus yard runs in every game. That's not the concern here. The concern is the 13-yard pass on 3rd and 12 because the pass rush got to Bryce Young, but Bryce Young created an extra 2 seconds for himself to deliver an annoying pass down the field that ends up converting a 3rd and long in a clutch situation. That is the concern with not being able to finish plays at the quarterback, and why I'm always asking, okay, are the New Orleans Saints going to be tested by Bryce Young? Yeah, he's not running all around like Lamar Jackson, running for over 100 rushing yards and everything like that. But Is he extending the play long enough, like a Tyler Bagent was last year, and converting on big third downs and big get the offense off the field type situations for the defense? Those are the things that I'm mostly concerned about. And so Dave Canales scheming that up, but Dennis Allen being able to counter that. How do you do that? The additions of Chase Young on defense, the addition of Willie Gay on defense should be able to help them here in terms of making those plays at the quarterback, in terms of containing the quarterback, all those other things, and getting the ball, forcing the ball out of Bryce Young's hands. You want Bryce Young throwing the football, but you want Bryce Young throwing the football out of rhythm, not necessarily in rhythm in terms of drop back, plant, deliver, nor do you want him extending plays and delivering out of structure with confidence. You want him delivering out of structure, out of rhythm, without the confidence. And that means moving him off of his spot, forcing him to hold on to the ball a little bit longer than he wants to, or better yet, forcing him to deliver the ball faster than he wants to, therefore and thereby impacting the timing between him and his receiver. So that's, for me, what I'm going to be watching the most is the New Orleans Saints defense up against Carolina's offense and which one has the ability to adjust. But let's not get it twisted. The New Orleans Saints offense is one of the big stories going into this game. New offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak finally gets an opportunity to really unveil his playbook. Now, he's only going to unveil it so much, right? He's going to unveil it a week one's amount of appropriate. But is that enough to be able to counter what Carolina is going to try to do on the defensive side? Now, I will say this. If I'm looking at the New Orleans Saints offense, even though I have my questions about whether or not they'll be able to implement the offense, get it going in time, logical, understandable questions for when a new offense is being installed in a system, and especially when you have a quarterback that's now going through his 8th offensive coordinator change, which isn't Derek Carr's fault, but something that plays a factor. Even though I have those question marks, I still feel more confident in New Orleans Saints offensive personnel than I feel in Carolina's defensive personnel, right? Like, this is a winnable game for the New Orleans Saints. I picked the New Orleans Saints to win. I think it's 24-17, 24-16, probably a few more field goals than anything else for Carolina. But the way that they get there and the way that they get that done is by being able to produce over on the offensive side. So I'm very excited to see what Clint Kubiak is able to do up against a very good, smart defensive coordinator in Carolina in terms of what he's able to bring in Ejiro Evero. I do think that he's a talented defensive coordinator. I think he has some talent over on that Carolina Panthers defense, but is it enough to hang with the New Orleans Saints offense? I don't think so. That is, as long as the New Orleans Saints offense doesn't stagnate itself. What should you be expecting to see from the Carolina Panthers offense from Dave Canales? Well, we know a few things, right? Dave Canales is somebody that runs his offense like much of the NFC West, right? That's what his offense looks like. It's misdirection. It's trying to confuse. It's window dressing. It's the outside zone runs. It's play action. It's all the things that the New Orleans Saints are trying to do over on their offensive side as well, but certainly with some tweaks that will aid Bryce Young. So how do the New Orleans Saints disrupt that? Pressure up the middle. That's going to be the big thing. Can you get in Bryce Young's face, right? Can you win in the middle? Now, it's going to be tough because the Carolina Panthers have invested a lot of money in their offensive interior. I think it's over $150 million in their offensive interior alone, not just the offensive line, but between Robert Hunt and the other guys that they brought in and Brady Christensen being added to that offensive line as a whole, not necessarily the interior, but being able to bolster that offensive line, it's going to be a task for the New Orleans Saints pass rush. So a good test for them to see how much their pass rush has grown going from 2023 to 2024. But I think the interior pass rush becomes very important for Dennis Allen and the New Orleans Saints. Stunts, twist, everything you have to do to get there, do it. Now, for the New Orleans Saints on the offensive side, for me, this one's all going to come down to the run game. That's what I'm going to dive into next, because I think it's going to be the run game, in addition to those adjustments, that most decides this matchup. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with Locked On Saints, part of Locked Up Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is the must-go destination if you're looking to hire and expand employment within your small businesses. You can join over 2.5 million small businesses that already use LinkedIn to hire on their platform. And why do you want to use LinkedIn? Well, it's because over 70% of users that utilize LinkedIn Jobs don't even visit other leading job sites. So if you're not hiring from LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place, plain and simple. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours of posting their job. So hire professionals like a professional with LinkedIn Jobs. They also make the process easier for you too. They have a new feature that ends up helping you create and write job descriptions, making the process even easier and even faster for you. What are you waiting for? Head over today to linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, family, it all comes down to the run game in addition to those coaching adjustments between the New Orleans Saints and the Carolina Panthers. But I think the New Orleans Saints are uniquely positioned to come out on top in this category. We appreciate you very much. As always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day for your second listen. Make sure you go and check out the Madman Tyler Rowland as well as the Barber Tony Wiggins every single day, a daily double dose of NFL content over at Locked On NFL. I was on Tyler's episode yesterday. We were arguing about Lamar Jackson. Is he holding the Ravens back? Is he not? I absolutely do not think that he's holding the Ravens back. I made my argument over at Locked On NFL. So make sure you go and check that out today as your second listen. And don't forget, we'll also be live later on today after practice, giving you kind of the last tidbits that you need to know before we head into the weekend. And then tomorrow, 5 things that you need to know heading into the matchup on Sunday. So lots of stuff coming up for you here on Locked On Saints and, of course, all around the Locked On Podcast Network. So I think the New Orleans Saints are uniquely positioned to win in the run game in this matchup, which is a very important aspect of this matchup for both New Orleans and Carolina. Remember last year, Carolina had 2 running backs, Chuba Hubbard, as well as Miles Sanders, that ran for over 160 yards. It was 161 yards. Against the New Orleans Saints in the December matchup, right? The second matchup where Carolina was held to just 6 points. So again, proving the point that I always mention that you run the ball to win the game, but you pass to score points, right? But I do think that the run game ends up being important in this matchup because the run game is going to set up for both of these teams the opportunity to score points in the passing game. It's all got to start in the run game. That's what Dave Canales' offense is all about. It's all about the horizontal stretch, attacking, spreading you out, and everything like that, and being able to kind of find those voids that get created in stretching the defenses out. And a lot of that gets done through the run game. Then you take advantage of it in the passing game in order to put points on the board. So even when you have an offense that goes out there and rushes for over 160, 170 yards, 2 backs rushing for a combined 161, it's not enough to put points on the board for you. You have to be able to then take that and then counteract and be able to turn those into points in the passing game. And that's where I think that New Orleans is more uniquely positioned to find greater success this week than the Carolina Panthers, who really don't have passing grade, like good passing weapons, right? They've got Xavier Legette, who I think is going to be a very good player in the NFL for a while, but then the list kind of stops there. Yes, they added Deontay Johnson, but no offense to Deontay Johnson, but is he somebody that really scares opposing secondaries? I'm not sure, right? Maybe he is. We'll find out on Sunday. But when you've got Marshawn Lattimore, Paulson Adebo, Alontae Taylor, Tyrann Mathieu, I'm still convinced it's going to be Will Harris at safety. When you have those guys in the secondary, you probably feel pretty good about going up against Adam Thielen, who's another year under his belt and all these other things. Like, you feel pretty good about that. So the run game comes in to help set up everything that happens with the passing game. But here's where I think the Saints are uniquely positioned to be able to take advantage of that. In the preseason, and I know it's just preseason football, but just hear me out. In the preseason, the New Orleans Saints ran for 5 explosive plays simply running to the C and D gaps. The C gap is outside the tackle. The D gap is outside the tight end, right? So those outside zone runs, those tracks in the outside zone where you want to be able to be expanding your offense here this year if you're the New Orleans Saints. I did one of the exclusive Q&As that we do over on the Locked On Saints Insider program, and I got a fantastic question from one of our insiders who wanted to know what my first play call would be for the New Orleans Saints. Well, the first play call, it's really 2 play calls for me. The first play call is the outside zone run to either side, and then the second play call is an outside zone play action, bootleg, rollout, levels concept to the opposite side. This is the goal in terms of building the run game on the outside and being able to move the offensive line, get them moving off the ball, and then be able to do the same thing in the passing game and be able to advance the ball down the field, trying to hit those intermediate and deep areas. The New Orleans Saints saw a massive tick up from their preseason games, from their regular season games last year in targeting the area of the field 10 to 19 yards away from the line of scrimmage. The Saints need that in this game. And going up against a I'll call it, I don't want to call it a, I want to be careful about how I talk about the secondary for Carolina because we simply don't know more than anything else, right? Like that's really the biggest thing. But so in unknown, but nonetheless, still a shaky secondary for the Carolina Panthers. It has been for a while. I think it will continue to be, at least for right now. And especially like, hey, at least JC Horn's healthy for week 1. That's great for Carolina. But I think the Saints are okay when it comes to that. So attacking sort of a weaker, quote unquote, secondary in terms of what we project that secondary to be without having seen them yet. Attack the 10 to 19 yard area down from the line of scrimmage. Attack the middle of the field. Go after the Carolina Panthers defense in that way. They have a couple of familiar pieces, right? Former Denver Broncos linebacker Josie Jewell traveling with former Denver Broncos defensive coordinator to Carolina. But then the list kind of stops there. So this is going to be new for a lot of people. So being able to take advantage of all that all starts with the run game. Because what happens is that you start running to the outside. When you start running to the outside and you start finding success in the run game, 4, 5, 6 yards per carry, then all of a sudden, the defense starts to kind of creep up to the line of scrimmage. If the defense is creeping up to the line of scrimmage, that's creating a greater void in the middle of the field in that 10 to 19 yard area, right? That gap between the linebacker and the safety goes from being, let's call it 10 yards apart. I'm just making up numbers. 10 yards apart to the linebackers creeping down, and all of a sudden it's 13 yards apart. Remember, that's an additional 9 feet of space that gets opened up when you adjust something just 3 yards. We talk about a game of inches. Look at last night's game. The Baltimore Ravens are a toe away from competing with the Kansas City Chiefs in the 2024 season, if you want to overreact a little bit to some Thursday night football kickoff action. So it's all about a game of inches. And if you could create a game of 9 feet, you're probably winning that game. And so all that starts with the run game. And the other reason why I think the Saints are uniquely positioned in this situation is because of Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara gives you somebody that you can run outside the tackles, you can run inside the tackles, and you can throw to, right? Utilizing him as a passing threat out of the backfield then creates your additional opportunity to extend your run game to the short passing game. We used to talk about this with New Orleans all the time. They viewed their short passing game as an extension of their run game. If they're doing things like that here in this new offensive system, then not only is that making some of these linebackers maybe creep up a little bit, it's also making them bite on where the running back is running their route out of the field, which makes the other side of the field a little bit lighter in your ability to be able to attack. So you have Alvin Kamara going out into the flats and you're pulling a linebacker out that way, but then you have a receiver from the same area of the field crossing the middle of the field. Boom. You've got something hit as soon as he crosses that center, right? As soon as he crosses the middle of the field, one of the hashes, whatever your landmark is the quarterback in that situation. If you're able to time that up so you're delivering that pass off of the 5-step drop, then bam, you're cooking, you're in business. And all that comes from what the running backs are doing out of the backfield. And not only does that include Alvin Kamara, but I promise you that will also include Taysom Hill. That will include Jamal Williams. That will include a lot of different players. But I'm excited to see how this all goes because I think the run game is uniquely important to this game. And I think that the coaching adjustments, as we discussed earlier, and all the different places where all that kind of trickles in and impacts every other area of the game ends up being the two things that impact everything else that end up deciding this matchup between the New Orleans Saints and the Carolina Panthers, which I think goes the New Orleans Saints way. Coming up next, I want to give you the last thing that I wanted to highlight in terms of what I'm most excited about for the 2024 season, and it's all about that outside zone run and how I believe it will help to revitalize Alvin Kamara in 2024. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our good friends over at PrizePicks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. Let me explain how this works out because it's not you versus the spreadsheet wizards. It's not you versus mystery lineups. You know exactly what you're doing. We kind of talk about it as it's you versus the house, right? It's nice and easy. Here's how it goes, right? You end up putting down an entry, and in putting down that entry, you then turn around and pick 2 to 5 players and choose whether or not they're going to come in at more or less in their PrizePicks projection. Super simple. And in fact, you can get an immediate win right now every week in September because one Caleb Williams passing yard counts as one of those wins. You get those wins right and you get up to, let's say, 4 correct, you can end up getting up to 100 times your entry back just by basically utilizing your football knowledge, not getting lucky. So will this player have more or less passing yards? Will this player have more or less rushing yards? It's super, super simple. That's it. That's all you got to do. So go and check them out today. Download the PrizePicks app and use the promo code in all lowercase Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code Locked On NFL, all lowercase, on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even have to win to get that $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints outside zone run game, wide zone scheme. It's one of the things I'm most excited to see in 2024 because I think it will help to revitalize one of the New Orleans Saints' best players in their history and one of the most important players of their season. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being here and for making us a part of your day. Don't forget, we'll be live later on today recapping practice. Another episode for you Saturday morning with 5 things you need to know heading into Sunday's matchup. And of course, we'll be live after the game from the floor of the Superdomes. Make sure you come through for that as well, while we celebrate what I believe will be a New Orleans Saints victory this weekend, or we lament big time if they drop this one. Because if the Saints drop this one, then oh my gosh, this is going to be a rough year if they drop that first game. All right, y'all. So here's what I'm looking at when it comes to what I'm most excited about in the 2024 season. I discussed Taysom Hill. I talked about the defensive front seven. There's other stuff. Derek Carr and Chris Olave. I'm excited for their connection. Juwan Johnson being back. I'm excited to see what Jordan Mims ends up being. In fact, we'll be able to kind of maybe roll into that a little bit here in this topic. But the big thing for me right now, also, in addition to the motion, the play action, all these things that we've broken down over and over again, is simply the zone run scheme being a little bit more prevalent. Now, I want to remind what I always remind as a caveat when it comes to this. When it comes down to the man run versus zone run scheme splits, man run being when you simply, as an offensive line, block the guy in front of you, zone run being when you actually worry about gaps, right? You're moving to a gap to go and block that. You're trying to create multiple holes for the running back to be able to choose from and all these things. It's all an orchestration. It's a beautiful concert. It's a beautiful orchestra. It's one of my favorite things in football, is seeing that zone run work. But being a wide zone or zone run heavy scheme does not mean that you're running 70% or even 60% of your offense through that zone run. Sometimes it's 55 to 45. It's not a humongous split. So it's not like the Saints are going to go out there and never run the man zone concepts. Again, it's why I always kind of scoffed at the idea that, Jamal Williams, he's not going to fit in this offense anymore because they're running the zone scheme. Yeah. But they're still running the man scheme. Like, it doesn't stop you from actually running these man runs. And so, or gap runs, depending upon who you're talking to. And so you'll hear those two terms interchanged: gap scheme, man scheme, same thing, or similar enough to be the same thing. So when it comes to the zone run, the thing that I'm most excited about specifically, because you can have inside zone runs and you can have outside zone runs, is the outside zone run. And the outside zone runs are the ones that ends up taking the running back to running outside the tackle. It doesn't mean that they actually go around the tackle, because again, the whole offensive line is moving to the play side. So what you're really looking at is the pre-snap landmark, right? It's the outside shoulder of the tackle, which might be on the left hash. But then if that tackle ends up bouncing all the way towards the outside, closer to in between the hash and the numbers, it doesn't move the gap for the running back. The running back is still going to that point of attack, or POA. Sometimes you'll hear it called. And so there's different gaps and things like that. Like there's the 9 and 8 gaps, which are the ones that are typically on the outside, one to the left side, one to the right side. So that's what you're going to be seeing a lot of. And I think that this is going to be big in revitalizing Alvin Kamara for 2024. I don't think Alvin Kamara has been consistently and correctly used for probably the past 3 seasons. That's my opinion. The team would probably disagree, and that's okay. That's fine. I just, looking at what they've done in terms of having to use him as a little bit more of a bell cow back over the course of the past 3 seasons, which comes out of necessity, right? Other injuries at the running back position, not going about the Latavius Murray signing in the most appropriate way that ended up opening up Latavius Murray to being poached off the practice squad as opposed to being added to the active roster. Although I understand the optics of that are skewed, because it's like, well, did you really know he was going to pop off like that in a game? So you didn't add him to the active roster. Hindsight's 2020, whatever. But in all those cases, because of the decisions and because of the injuries and because of the play calling, Alvin Kamara was typically run up the middle. And not typically run up the middle, but was run up the middle just as much as he was run towards the outside. And a lot of people talked about, well, his yards after contact, he wasn't creating yards. he wasn't really doing that in his prime 17, 18, 19 either. It was yards being created for him by the offensive line. But then it was also about him getting yards after contact against smaller tacklers on the outside. I mean, you think about him bouncing off of Shaq Thompson, who is a linebacker, but not the biggest linebacker in the world. You know what I mean? So I give Alvin Kamara his credit for his contact balance, for his ability to be able to stay up, the way that he just kind of bounces off of tacklers and all this other stuff. But you're not doing that when you've got 300-pound guys stopping you at the line of scrimmage because you're running up the middle. Different game, baby. Entirely different game at that point. And so that's why I love this new emphasis on getting to the outside, stretching the defenses horizontally in the run game, running to those outside zone opportunities, and using Alvin Kamara to do that, because you're putting him in positions to be able to better bounce off those tacklers, because the tacklers aren't 300 pounds and in a very close proximity to one another, to where even if you do bounce off of one of those tacklers, you're bouncing right into one of the others when you're running congested in the middle. And then that builds up, right? Hit. That ends up hurting. It ends up hurting after a little while. And then all of a sudden you've got to run to the outside. What energy do you have left, right? Or what conserved elusiveness is able to be withheld in those situations, right? All these different question marks. And so now that the emphasis is getting him to the outside, getting him out in space, wanting to get him into those situations where he's going up against smaller tacklers, wanting to get him in those situations where he's got lead blockers out in front of him. You have the ability to do the two things that you used to do that maximize his game back when he was young and a rookie in the NFL, or a young vet in the NFL. You create yardage for him before contact, and you allot him the opportunity to be able to create better opportunities for yards after contact, because he's not being swarmed by defensive linemen every play. And best of all, he's getting outside to those situations where he's taking on safeties, corners, linebackers, but not after 7 straight plays of being piled on by the big defensive linemen. You see what I'm saying? And so I think that all of that ends up kind of elevating a bit of what Alvin Kamara's game is, where he's at his best, and how he'll be able to best contribute to this team. And the fact that he's also running routes downfield, I think, is big too, right? Him lining up in the slot, him running routes out of the backfield, but not being stuck only waiting behind the line of scrimmage as a check down option, but being a legitimate option as a vertical route runner, I think, is another thing that ends up having a big boost to the New Orleans Saints offense, and of course builds on Alvin Kamara's talents as a running back as a whole. Not just running, but also his ability to be able to be a receiver. We saw the New Orleans Saints drop their targets behind the line of scrimmage from last year into this year's preseason by almost half, and that is a pretty big indication of what the New Orleans Saints are intending to do. If we accept that as their DNA, their identity, in terms of what we saw from their vanilla version of their offense, the foundation, the land of what it is that they're doing, we have to expect they're only going to build on that in the regular season. And so that should mean more of that for the New Orleans Saints as well. Less targets behind the line of scrimmage, more pushing the ball, at least beyond the line of scrimmage in the short, intermediate, and then eventually deep areas when those opportunities present themselves, and building it all off of the run game. I'm also very excited to see what this means for Jordan Mims. Jordan Mims is going to get 4 weeks of solid opportunities, probably as the extra sort of change up back that's doing a little bit more of the Alvin Kamara stuff than doing a little bit more of the Jamal Williams stuff. But I also think that Jamal Williams gets a benefit from this as well. We saw in that preseason game where he really got to running that outside zone, how well he ran that scheme. And so I'm excited to see him benefit from this as well. So I'm stoked. I'm stoked for the outside zone run game. And then it's the passing game that I just want to see come to life, right? The quicker that comes to life, the better I think the New Orleans Saints will finish in 2024. But we got to wait and see it first. But this run game, very excited to see it. All right, y'all. Once again, we'll be live later on today. Fresh episode tomorrow morning. 5 things you need to know going into the matchup against the Carolina Panthers. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us your first listen for your second listen. Be sure to go and check out my good friend Jake Madison over at Locked On Pelicans. He and I will be chilling later on today, so make sure you say hi. And then, of course, you can go and check out my good friend Matt Moscona over at Locked On LSU. Keep up with everything going on all around Locked On Louisiana. Thank you very much for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure that you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing, how you living. Let me know how you momming them. I trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.